was, an unprecedented year, probably the most frequently used word to describe 2020. The first half of the year, there were unprecedented volumes on the slow side. Many of our customers had big slowdowns in their volume. Most of our customers import from Asia. So we were experiencing slowdowns in volume as early as January and February, when coronavirus was more of an issue in Asia rather than in the US. So on the supply side, we were pretty significantly impacted up front. Then as the year moved on and COVID migrated over to the US and impacted the demand side of the US economy, we went from unprecedented slow volumes to unprecedented high volumes. It was a huge challenge to respond in the first part of the year as things were very slow, and then to ramp up capacity in the back half of the year as everybody tried to accommodate the backlog of freight that was being pushed through the ports. As soon as COVID kind of came onto the scene, that really kind of overwhelmed all other narratives related to the international supply chain, because regardless of the trade policies that were in place, if factories were shut down in China and demand wasn't happening in the US, that was the prevailing storyline of the year. I think without a doubt, the biggest challenge for shippers was forecasting demand. So in the early part of the year, as things were really starting to slow down and import volume and export volume were both significantly depressed, nobody really knew how the back half of the year would go, because there was thoughts that we were entering into a prolonged recession that could potentially turn into a depression, or there were thoughts that the stimulus would come in and reinvigorate the economy and we would have this big V-shaped recovery. And so from a shipper standpoint, there was very little data for them to forecast demand on. And so as it became apparent that demand was rebounding very quickly and very significantly, sourcing the capacity within their supply chains to support that huge increase in demand that was not really planned for became a huge challenge. And all of the service providers that support the import supply chain were trying to accommodate this huge increase in demand with a supply chain that was set up for a very different volume level. So that was the biggest challenge, was shippers trying to provide good forecasting to their providers, and then the providers very quickly trying to accommodate just unprecedented swings up in volume. Thinking about the drayage space, because it was such a challenging year, both on the downside and the upside with the big changes in volume, it really, I felt like, presented an opportunity for drayage providers that are really value-added providers to separate themselves from drayage providers that might just be more commoditized. NFI was able to weather the early part of the storm very confidently as import volumes were dropping significantly. The diversification in our service offering enabled us to weather the storm extremely well. We've got a really strong balance sheet that I think showed customers that we can make it through not just good times but tough times as well. And then from a service standpoint, drayage providers that are very technologically advanced from a visibility standpoint to provide customers insight into the status of their freight every step of the way, from when it hits the port to when it gets delivered and unloaded at the transload facility. So they got visibility of their freight throughout the supply chain. That's been a big advantage for us, and I think has separated us from the competition. Having a real estate competency where we've been able to go out and source additional yards and warehouse space on very short notice to provide space relief for customers that might not have either had space at their import warehouse or needed to get freight off the ports to stop the clock on demurrage charges. We've been able to accommodate huge increases in space to save customers significant money. I would say being able to provide flexible capacity solutions. So we've got multiple fleets across the country that we've been able to leverage to meet the surge in demand, and then also lean on our brokerage division as well to source additional capacity where it was needed. And I'd say the last thing that we were able to do is we really pride ourselves on the relationships that we hold with steamship lines, with marine terminals, with chassis leasing companies. So to be able to lean on those relationships and provide good information to our customers on a real-time basis so that they can make decisions on what's going on with their freight imports as it makes its way through the supply chain, I think has been a real value add for our shippers.